Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jenica Beatty, and I am the Outreach and Technology Specialist for the Western Region TTA Center, a resource of the Administration for Native Americans. I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. Please be aware that today's webinar is being recorded. We will post the recording on our website at anawestern.org. We've also made handouts available in your webinar side panel that you can download and reference during and after this presentation. At the end of this session, you'll have the opportunity to submit a question for our question and answer session. To do so, simply type your question into the Q&A box on your side control panel at any time. With that said, I'd like to welcome everyone. We are the Western Region, and we are the hosts for today. The Western Region is one of 4 regional training and technical assistance centers that are provided by ANA, the Administration for Native Americans. ANA promotes self-sufficiency for Native Americans by providing discretionary grant funding for community-based projects, training, and technical assistance to eligible tribes and Native organizations. ANA's vision is to see that Native communities are thriving. Today's webinar is on community planning and preparedness, developing readiness for planning and planning strategies. Our presenters today are myself, Dan Van Otten, Barbara Aragon, and Joe Fraser. I'll turn it over now to allow them to introduce themselves. Dan?
Kwahola, my name's Dan, and my tribal affiliation is Cayuse. I live in Oregon, and I'm the Western Region Training Specialist. Worked with ANA for quite a while on both sides of the fence, and I'm looking forward to today's webinar and looking forward to chatting with folks who are participants in this webinar, both as part of the Q&A session and after the session's over. Barbara, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Dan. Hi, everyone. This is Barbara Aragon, and I'm calling in from Sacramento, California. My tribal affiliations are Laguna Pueblo and Crow, and I currently work with Native Connections, which is as a grant technical assistant with Tribal Tech, but I'm here just to talk about community readiness today. So I'm going to turn it over to Joe.
Thank you, Barbara. Hi, everybody. My name's Joe Fraser. I'm the Director of Post-Secondary Programs at Kaho'iwai Learning Ohana in Waimea at Hawaii Island in Hawaii. I'm actually Aboriginal Australian from the Wagaman peoples in the Northern Territory, and my role here today is as support for Kaho'iwai Learning Ohana. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Today's webinar aims to provide tools for assessing community readiness to address conditions that are negatively impacting the community or community segments, to discuss strategies that can engage the community in the assessment and development process, and to share one community's approach for engaging the assessment and project development process. So now I'll hand it over to Barbara to discuss the stages of readiness. Barbara, take it away.
Thank you, Jenica. Stages of readiness. Let's see, why even look at that? Well, I know that for the attendees, you're visionaries. And the reason I know that is because ANA, I guess, raises and fosters visions for communities. And as I was thinking about that, why look at stages of readiness? And one of the things that I know is that when we are visionaries and we want things different and better and more well for communities and families, we have to be visionaries. And many of you that are online already have a vision of what you would like to see, within your community that would be different, from what it is now. All of us have different heart issues. It might be in the area of cultural revitalization, say language or practice or ceremony, or it might be in the area of economic development or mental health or education. For me, in the job that I work, a lot of the work I do is in behavioral health. And specifically right now in the area of suicide and some of the contributing causes of suicide. And what I know is that all of us have those heart issues. I want you to just practice using the chat box and to think about, and we'll come back to this again, but think about what is a heart issue for you. For example, one of the things for me is suicide prevention and mental health. That's a heart issue for me. It's impacted my family, definitely the communities that I work in. But think about, what is that for you? What are you passionate about? What do you want to make a difference? And if you want to, just type in anything that's a heart issue in the chat box, then please do. Let's practice using that. If we think about what's important to us, then it's easier to understand not only the stages of readiness, but also what we can do about it. Okay, so stages of readiness. Trying to advance these slides. Okay, now some of these pictures might look familiar to you. When we have a passion about something, whatever it might be, often, and sometimes it's a result of a crisis. For some of the communities that I work in, some of the crises and the responses is they might have suicide or domestic violence, something that is a behavioral health and mental health issue within their community. And sometimes there's a crisis, and people say, we need to do something about this. We need to make a difference. And someone will say, we should have a meeting. We should have a task force. And so into the picture to your left, to the right, you might have people, a group like that comes together after a crisis, say, let's do something. And as you can see, these folks are engaged, they're listening. But after a few meetings, and maybe even the next couple of months, that group tends to dwindle and get smaller. And then sometimes we end up with the image on the left, who's around the table now? What happened to all the people that were wanting to be a part of this? And that's really common. If you've experienced that, you can probably say, yep, that's what happened. We had a lot of passion for a moment about a particular issue, but now it just tends to be staff, what I call the usual suspects keep showing up, but the community in general, isn't there. And so one of the reasons that happens is that visionaries such as yourself, or people that have a passion, tend to have a higher level of readiness to do something about an issue than the community in general does. And that's normal. That's a normal thing. And so if, think about which one of these images that seem more familiar to you. And so now we're going to talk about community readiness. Why? What are some of the elements of community readiness? Because there's definitely things that you can do to raise the level of readiness for your community to address an issue. Okay. What I'm going to be talking about, and in your handouts that Jenica mentioned, there is information about the community readiness model that was developed by the Triethnic Center at Colorado State University. And there are literally thousands of articles and information about the community readiness model. And what the community readiness model says is that we can get our community ready. We can raise the level of readiness for our community because the readiness of dimensions tend to be in 6 different areas. And that the more that we educate and build the awareness of our community, the more ready they become to do something about it. And so there are certain measurements that are taken, and it starts with interviewing key members of the community, but key meaning not just the heads of departments, but people that know the community, but you also have to focus on diversity. And so if you interview people, you're going to look at interviewing elders. You might be a director of a program. It may be a youth. It may someone from the school. It might be, the bus driver. So you're going to be interviewing different people, a diverse group within the community. And there's questions around these different dimensions. What do they know about the efforts in that community? For example, I'm working with a community in Southern California that we're going to be doing some training on community readiness, and it's going to be along the lines of bullying or lateral oppression. And so the questions are going to be efforts. Do you know what efforts exist in your community? And then you'll go deeper about the knowledge of efforts. And there's two different, even though they might sound the same, they're very different. We'll also look about leadership. How invested is leadership? What does the leadership know within your community about bullying? You'll also look at climate. And climate is the attitude that exists in your community. What do they know about it? Is it something that's important to them? Is it something that, it's no big deal to them? So you really want to assess what's the climate towards that issue. You also want to know the knowledge of the issue. What is out there? Is data exists out there? Is it with the county? Is it with the tribe? If you're a tribal organization, what is the knowledge of the issues and what's being done about it? And then there's also, resources. I'm going over this, very quickly, but those are some of the areas that are the dimensions of community readiness that you want to consider. Okay, it's a little too quick here. Okay, then there are also, besides that, there are stages of readiness. And so once you walk through the community readiness assessment, what it looks at, there are different stages. And the first one is that sometimes people don't want to do anything about an issue because they're at a number one stage. There's no awareness at all. I don't even think that's a problem. I've never heard of that. I didn't even know it exists. So there's no awareness of that issue or that this is occurring within their community. The next stage is denial and resistance. And denial is, oh yeah, I know about that problem, but I don't think it's going on here. I think it's going on the other side of town or on the other side of the reservation, and so there's resistance to do anything about it. Then you can see vague awareness. Vague awareness is, yes, I know it's happening, but it's not impacting me. It's really those folks over there. So often there's some judgment, that there's a sense of judgment there. And then as you move along and you get more ready and your awareness is built, then there's pre-planning. And probably a lot of you are in that pre-planning stage, pre-planning, preparation, and some of these higher stages of readiness, preparation, planning, initiation. So if you look at those and if you move along those stages, the higher levels, such as in stage 9, there's really strong levels of community awareness saying this is our issue and we own this issue and we're going to do something about it. And that's why we have this program. And so this is just kind of a very, quick overview about community readiness. There are handouts that are in there that to explore it more. We also have resources besides webinars that we can point you to, and also folks that go out and do the training about community readiness. But community readiness is real key to doing planning within your community. And so just think about that. And I don't know if you had a chance to put in an issue.
We did have one.
Oh, okay. What is the one of the that people said?
Yeah, so one of them was substance abuse.
Substance abuse. Okay. That's another one that's really close to my heart. So if you think about substance abuse, think about with that issue, whatever it is, whatever heart issue or passion that you're working on, things you want to change. I think that we have a chat box. So try to think about even if you didn't put anything in there, where would your community, or what level of readiness would you think your community might be in? Is it in no awareness? Is it in vague awareness? I know a couple of the grantees that I'm working with are in vague awareness. And so we're looking at different strategies to raise that level of awareness. And there are a lot of them, because once you look at the model, there is suggestions of what you can do to raise awareness and and then raise readiness. Okay. So
we had one person say that they felt they were in vague awareness.
In vague awareness. Okay, great. And that's good to know, because if you know what stage you are in, then you can look at the different strategies and think, well, how do we address vague awareness? And one of the things that you can do is to begin to look at local statistics. Because if I'm looking at, say, substance abuse, and I just not sure it's an issue, then one of the things I can do, if I am a provider, if I am someone that's involved in raising awareness, is I might look at local statistics. I might go to the medical facilities, I might go to the county, or I might get a powerful personal story that I'm going to share to make to raise the level of awareness that, yes, this is happening in our community, and these are some of the consequences of substance abuse, or bullying, whatever the issue is. There are different strategies and activities that I can do to raise that level of readiness, so people are more inclined to do something about it. And so if we only have one, I don't know if we want to move into planning.
Well, Barbara, could I just jump in and say one thing? This is Dan.
Please do.
Thanks. One of the things that we used to think about ourselves as, and some of us still do think about ourselves as tribal planners or community planners. And a lot of times what we get put into when we're a planner of some sort is we end up being the grant writer. And it's a hard position to be in when we don't have connections with the community to help us with that process. So what we're talking about today is how to reach out. Maybe not you yourself. Maybe there are people in program areas that are interested in moving some issues forward, some community problem areas, some areas of community concern forward, and trying to get resolution of them. Make sure that you develop partnerships with those program folks who are in the trenches, who can help with the community outreach and assessment work, who can help with refining the definition of the concern that's going to be addressed. That's really an important piece of building our awareness of where the community is, and community readiness is working with our colleagues who are out there in the community, sort of addressing issues in the community and trying to move community members forward into a more a better position, a better place in their lives.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate those comments, because that's really the truth, and we find that very often that that the folks, the voices of the communities don't often have an opportunity unless we're really diligent and making sure that we're hearing those voices. But doing a community readiness assessment is one of the ways that you can do that. And so I'm typing in there, and I really can't see if other people chat, but I'm going to put in information about the community readiness model in the chat box. And but I hope this will prompt you, just plant some seeds to begin to think about, where is your community as far as their readiness to address an issue. And I know that the rest of the presentation is going to talk about the importance of readiness, but also some examples of planning. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jenica.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. So how can we use community involvement in planning to progress towards stage 9, that high level of community ownership? The answer lies in your ability to engage with your community, as Barbara was saying. So here we're going to walk through just a few methods for engagement. First, a well-developed community plan stems directly from the community. Their thoughts and opinions should help you to define, refine, and design any plan that you implement. As you move forward in your planning process, bring new or different community members into the fold. The planning process should remain fluid and inclusive. So we'll discuss each of the following methods for building community engagement and increasing community readiness in more detail. From steering committees to key informant interviews, all can be used sequentially to support well-designed community plans. A steering committee is one of the most effective ways to ensure community input is used in the planning process, as well as maintaining community involvement throughout the life of a project. Steering committees should be made up of people who can represent a cross-section of the community. Avoid having a steering committee solely comprised of one group of people, like just elders or only tribal staff. Instead, include people who are functional leaders within the community, like those who represent identified segments of the community, like youth, adults, volunteers, teachers, students, business owners, and so on. Also include staff, tribal leaders, and partner organizations, even if they don't partner on the final project. This will establish a group who will not only act as a committee themselves, but also as a conduit to reach out to and involve their represented community segments. When a steering committee meets to discuss the concerns that they have observed in their segment of the community, they will be able to identify both the barriers to long-term community change as well as the causal factors that a community plan and project approach may need to address. For example, a steering committee may identify a common barrier of unemployment, and then such causal factors as a tight job market, community members unable to qualify for existing jobs, jobs requiring knowledge and skills that the community members don't possess, long distances between home and the workplace, and even parents unable to work because of children requiring daycare. All of these contribute to the high rates of unemployment in this example community. This sets in motion a jumping off point for addressing the unemployment barrier. As planning continues, the steering committee uses a team approach to arrive at a set of potential problem areas that can be explored with the community as a whole. Be sure that the community members know that you hope to keep your steering committee involved by assigning them oversight of implementation activities if the project is funded. A next step to moving through a community-based planning process is to conduct community surveys. Content of the survey will be based on the preliminary findings of the steering committee. The survey would include both open and closed-ended questions. So if the steering committee identified high unemployment rates as a challenge being faced, a closed-ended question may ask survey respondents to rank the following causal factors based on which they believe is the most significant concern within the community. That's the tight job market, inability to qualify for existing jobs, not possessing necessary knowledge and skills, long distances between home and the workplace, or being in need of daycare. Also include open-ended questions to provide the survey respondents with the chance to write in any other causal factors. In our example community, the survey might say, list the main reasons for the high unemployment rate in our community. By collecting this data, you can then prioritize which causal factor is of the most concern. Perhaps in this example, the most common response was that people are unable to keep employment because they can't find reliable childcare. The benefit to using surveys is that they have the potential to collect information from a broad population, and once collected, survey results can be analyzed and used as a starting point for the planning process. Community meetings and gatherings are also a great way to identify major community concerns. Build this planning strategy around existing events that a planning team can take part in. Potlucks, powwows, and many other events can serve as a way to reach out to people. You can request that your discussion be added to an existing agenda or mix and mingle to get at individual concerns, man a booth to pass out surveys, or conduct outreach to host your own event where you address topics of interest. You can also maximize attendance at these events by offering incentives like refreshments, childcare, door prizes, and anything else. At a gathering, you can ask attendees to help refine the issues that the steering committee identified, as well as issues prioritized in surveys that have taken place. Have a discussion on the high unemployment rates and let the gathering know that most survey respondents believe that the lack of childcare options was the biggest concern. Dialogue at meetings like this might validate this claim and provide potential solutions to overcome the barrier. Make use of participants in these settings as a sounding board for additional ideas or to amend previously collected information. So focus groups, on the other hand, are more formal meetings that are best kept to a small number of a diverse set of people. You'll still want to have a representation of the community, but rather than driving at a consensus, a focus group is going to allow you to identify differences of opinion. In order to get started, you might get the group talking by asking a direct set of questions by providing information defined by the steering committee and refined through the surveys and gatherings. These questions can be used to identify and prioritize causal factors, as well as explore potential remedies for concerns identified in the preliminary planning phases. And they can drive at the primary reason for barriers and specific solutions for overcoming them. Questions you ask the focus group might include, what do you think are possible approaches to dealing with this condition? Or who would most benefit from this solution? When completed, you can take the data resulting from your focus group and conduct follow-up surveys with the larger community to determine if the suggested solutions are valid. Second or third focus groups can then hone in on one solution that may result in a specific project idea or to identify the target audience of the project approach. Finally, key informant interviews with those who are experts in dealing with this primary issue described in our preceding comments can help you refine problem statements and possible project components by sitting down with individuals to have a candid discussion of their concerns. They'll be able to provide you with information on how they personally relate to the current conditions in the community and provide expert insight that you might not otherwise get from a group discussion. So as mentioned earlier, this is just one process that can be used to increase your community readiness, and each method can be used in different sequences to drive community involvement in your planning process. By increasing communication and cooperation between various systems, your organization, your community, your partners, you can define, refine, and design a viable community-based plan. Engagement at these levels will mobilize your community towards the next stage of community readiness and ultimately lasting community change. So I'm going to hand it off to Dan to talk about one last piece of the puzzle.
Thanks, Jenica. And one of the things that I just want to sort of give you a visual image of, think of the process that Jenica's just described as an inverted pyramid, an inverted triangle. At the broad top layer of that inverted triangle, we're picking up information from as many places as we can, from as many populations as we can, as many community segments as we can, of what is going on in the community that folks would like to see changed. And as we take those issues and refine them, we do a little bit more in the way of community gathering of information, and then we move into focus group and key informant kinds of pieces to get a more clear, a more concise idea of what those concerns are, how to define them and how to address them. I really want to emphasize, the older I get, the more I think steering committees have been an underrated tool in our work. A steering committee that provides us with conduits to different pieces of the community and our partners and our staff and our community leaders, and can come together and share information from those constituents that they represent and with whom they're in contact is a really effective way, I think, of building a project and implementing and overseeing a project. And there's a piece of me that thinks that steering committees ought to be sort of written into project budgets sometimes, with stipends available to those folks in the community who aren't there on an existing piece of dime or dollar, from partner organizations that are paid to have reps there, to our staff that are paid to have reps there, to sometimes our elected officials who are salaried. And it's the folks in the community that are on those steering committees that we ought to think about giving some reimbursement to. We talk about long-range community goals as a starting point for doing our project development. What are the long-range goals of the community? And to really do an effective job of defining those long-range goals, we have to define the community. Are we talking about long-range goals related to the geographic community, demographic community, communities of affiliation? How does that work? And what are the barriers standing between the community and an identified long-range goal? So when you're starting your planning process and you're looking at the direction that the community wants to go after doing some outreach work, getting some idea from surveys and from community meetings, help with the definition of community. Is this project that we're focusing on, is it going to be a project that involves the long-range goals and barriers to long-range goals, and a project goal that involves a geographic community, the Rosebud Reservation, or the community members living in Hilo, or the folks in the native village of Cake? I mean, if it's a geographic community, make sure you let you put that in place as the centerpiece of how this project is going to unfold. If it's a demographic community, is it going to be? Sometimes we start out talking about the geographic community, and the geographic community says, no, we're really interested in what's going on with our youth. We're concerned about our youth, or we're concerned about our elders, and we want to focus on a project that deals with a specific issue that is impacting our elders or impacting our youth. So then we've got a demographic community. So we redefine, as we move through the project development process, we redefine that definition of community. Or it could be a community of affiliation. It could be folks that are interested in cultural preservation issues. We're really wanting to provide some support to our bow and arrow society folks, and here's why. Here are the long-range goals associated with cultural preservation. Here are the issues that are impacting that long set of long-range goals, and here's the community of affiliation that we want to work with in helping to move forward with long-range goal accomplishment and problem resolution or problem reduction. Special interest community, it's kind of the same thing in a lot of ways. It could be, the elders and the youth that are interested in doing revitalization of the language and revitalization of language use. So we've moved through a community planning process, and the geographic community has said, this is the area that we really want to focus on, this special interest area. It's a cultural preservation component that is really important to us. And then the organizational community. We can talk, about the community as the tribal staff or native nonprofit staff. That's a community as well. And that community has long-range goals associated with it, and certainly has, barriers to long-range goals that quite often become real serious, and that as the community planning process unfolds, the organizational community becomes the focus of the project. So define the community that you're going to be working with. As you move through the planning process, refine that definition as need be, and keep that definition clearly in mind as you move through the project development process. It's also going to help with the stage of readiness issues, because you're going to be moving through that process with those members of the community. Well, one of the things that I really am excited about with the next presentation is that the project you're going to hear about is a project that has connections to all of these community definitions of community, and has done some really great work in not just cultural preservation, but organizational development and capacity building in those communities. So if we could move the slides, move the slide on to Joe and his presentation, that would be great.
Thank you for that, Dan, and hi everybody. Welcome. So I'm going to talk about Kanuaka Aina, learning Ohana. Kanuaka Aina means plants of the land, and it essentially refers to Native Hawaiians, people of the land. In particular, I'd like to speak to our teacher education program. So as Dan said, our community is fairly clearly defined across each of those 5 boundaries. Our geographic boundary initially started off as Hawaii Island, but has really become all of the state, where we have Hawaiian educational need. Our demographic community is solidly education, and our community of affiliation is teacher education. Our special interest community is the Native Hawaiian charter school movement, specifically, and our organisational community is Kanuaka Aina, the non-profit, but we find that expanding to the other education non-profits as well. So just a little bit of background. Kaho'iwai started off as a doctoral work of Dr. Kerry Ann Hewitt. She was a Native Hawaiian employed at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And the first cohort started in the university in 2002. The 20 students graduated in 2003 with a bachelor's degree and qualified for a teacher's license. And then the university decided that it wasn't what they wanted to do anymore. And so the program fell into hiatus. Carrie Ann went away for a few years, and we came back into Hawaii Island in 2010 and found that the teacher program that was happening at Kanuaka Aina needed reaccreditation. So we spent 2 years reaccrediting and rebuilding the teacher program for accreditation and state recognition, which we got. And then we ran a pilot program in 2014. We're fortunate enough to get an ANA grant, which funded us for 5 years. So we took cohorts of students in 2015, 16, 17, and the last cohort for this grant started in April this year. So we've basically had 5 cohorts of students into the program now, and we've been learning and growing consistently throughout this period. So none of this would happen without our umbrella organisation. Kanuaka Aina, or Kalo, supports Kaho'iwai, but it also supports numbers of other programs. It's a community-based program supported by a Native Hawaiian board. It has its campus located within the Native Hawaiian homestead in Waimea, and it has extensive connections across the Hawaiian community. Our program doesn't stand alone, and I think that's a part of the strength of the program and the organisation, is that it tries to deal with need as it arises. And so Carlo's services include the Nalei Na'au'au Charter School Network. So there's 30-something charter schools in Hawaii, and 17 of them are Native Hawaiian focused. So we have a network to try and bring those charters together to assist in this process of education community building. We support Kanuwaka Aina Public Charter School, so it was one of the first public charter schools in the state, and Carlo provides a lot of services and support towards that particular school. They also have a community development finance institution because they realised that the schools were having trouble trying to access funding for support, short-term, small dollar support. So they started a CDFI. They have Malama Poki'i, which is a pre-K early childhood centre on site. But then they also have a network that supports Kahuli, which is a network of pre-K Native Hawaiian early childhood centres across the state. We have our Teacher Education Program Kaho'iwai. We collaborate with Chaminade University to make a master's program to train charter school administrators. The organisation does a lot of advocacy and legislation work because really a lot of our issues are about access and about equity and support. So that's been really important. And then the last part is the community infrastructure building and programming, which involves probably about, I think, about $12 or $14 million worth of campus building on site at the moment across the past 20 years. I think if I could go back to Barbara's presentation, when I came into the organisation, our stages of readiness were quite advanced. They'd had leadership, they understood the climate well, strong knowledge of issues. But what the role that I filled was that there was not a lot of specific resources around development of teacher ed programs. And so I was fortunate to come into an organisation that had a strong foundation in terms of stages of readiness. They also had a strong foundation in terms of awareness. The community was probably at, level 8 or 9. They really had done their work. They had identified needs as opposed to perceived needs. There'd been a lot of data collected. And so the organisation was really aware of and ready for the change that came through teacher education. What I think worked for our program in the organisation was the strong networks. The strong networks gave us access to a lot of capacity across different areas. And so we were fortunate that we had people who were specialists in money. There was people who were specialists in programming, in curriculum. We had elders who were able to bring a lot of the corporate and ancestral knowledge to this discussion. It allowed us to work with other areas of community need so we could share resources where needed. It allowed us to really collaborate. And by collaborate, I mean, we were prepared to give up money in order to have our needs met. So we didn't care about ownership. Especially recently, we had an issue where we had money and we wanted something done. We couldn't do it on our own. So the decision was made, we're ready to give that money away to somebody else so long as they can make it happen and we can share the benefits. So ownership wasn't a big deal at that point. We had really specific identified needs. We had data as opposed to perceived need. We were able to grow our own expertise. That was one of the things about the Hawaiian Charter movement was people were building the plane while they were still flying it to some extent. And so it allowed the organisation to really build its expertise to achieve the goals that they'd set. And we're at that point now where the next stage for us is about formally trying to build capacity with other folks that we're working with. And for us to have real cultural change is for our students, our graduates, to become our faculty and then our administration. So that's what we're thinking about at the moment in terms of preparing the community for where this is all heading when we're finished. So we're really a needs-driven program. That's basically where this all started. It started off with a focus on school education. It morphed into child services, because we had people teaching with us, but they needed childcare, so we started childcare community. The state said you need a teacher license, so we started a teacher training facility. The charters then needed qualified principals, so we created a leadership program. The CDFI was about trying to support those schools with small money for change, and then working extensively with legislation and advocacy to try and build in change at a system level. Things like equitable school funding, funding for facilities and transport for schools, so that kind of advocacy and legislation. So in identifying our need, we knew it started off with the poor performance of children in the DOE system. A lack of teachers was identified, and even now, although Hawaiians comprise something like 25%, 26% of the Hawaiian population, only about 9% of teachers are Hawaiian, as an example of why we still have this identified need. The needs of Hawaiians in society has been well established through the social and economic data that's available in the state. Remoteness and poverty, we know, continues to be an issue for us. And interestingly, ANA gave us an economic tool. It was started off about training teachers in the community, but what we realized is that if we train one teacher for license, they then get the DOE job in the community, their salary goes up a minimum of 34%, and the money stays in the community. So that was a really, really strong outcome beyond the education outcome that we had. It allows us to build a philosophy of teaching that's based on language and culture within those schools. Our teachers end up accessing a certification program for license. And one of the big things that still impacts our students is the actual cost of education. Most of the people we have, they're not licensed because they can't afford to do it. They can't afford to take the program. You know, $20,000 or $30,000 is just not something people have. This image is just a little bit of a snapshot of our program data. You can see we started off in 2014 with a pilot program of about 5 students. And we've just had a little bit of a dip in 16, which is a bit of a recruiting issue for us. I don't think we did as good a job working with the community around recruiting as we should have. So we've learned those lessons, as you can see, in the last 2 years. And we've had a really quite a good upward trend in terms of supporting students through our program. And I guess the next issue for us is looking around sustainability as a grants and philanthropy model. How do we continue to deliver teacher education training to folks that can't afford to do this, really can't afford not to do it either? So I'd just like to say that before I finish that we were really fortunate to be able to have a really advanced level of readiness and awareness when I came into this program. That was built off the back of 10 years of work by other people who truly were embedded within the community. We've got a strongly identified community across those 5 areas that Dan spoke about, and that a part of the key to our success is being able to have really, really strong community ties, to be able to leverage support and expertise, and at the same time to think about how we grow our own capacity within the community to keep supporting this work. So I think that's where I'll end, and I'll hand back to you, Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So now we have time for questions and answers. And if you'd like to have ask a question, feel free to enter it into the questions box on your control panel. So I'm going to give you some time to enter any questions you may have. And in the meantime, I'll ask Dan, do you have any closing thoughts?
One of the things that I think really crucial to any kind of successful operation, building any successful project in our communities, is to start where the community is. And what Barbara has given you at the beginning of this webinar is some ideas about how to determine where the community is. And what Jessica talked about were some ideas of expanding information about, or gathering better information about, what the community says is going on. One of the things I think that we have as a dilemma in our processes, from looking at applications that come in, I can tell you that a lot of applications provide demographic information as the definition of what's going on in the community and what the community would like to see taken care of, and what the community thinks the problem is. Sometimes that demographic information is local, sometimes it's regional, sometimes it's just national information. And really, it's going to be it is so important for us. It's so important for us. It always has been. It's going to be even more so in the future, for us to be in the community and get community definitions of not just long-range goals, which is very important, but who the community is, what the community is interested in looking at, and how the community wants to look at those issues. So long-range goals, and then what's standing between community and long-range goals, is something that has to be defined in the community. Once we get a little bit of a definition going on there, I know Joe came into the process after a lot of that community awareness had been built, but it would be really interesting, Joe, at some point in time, and maybe this is something that could be sent out to folks later. What kind of processes did folks go through to build that community consensus about, here are some things we want to deal with, and here's how we're going to deal with them? I don't know if you've got that information. If you do, share a little bit about it if you can. And if not, well, let's see if we can get some of that out to folks later.
Okay, so I don't have anything written, but just in terms of what I understand of the history, was that there was a small group of people who were really dissatisfied with their children's schooling experiences within their local area, who came together. And there was a little bit of serendipity, because it came together at the time when the state was starting to open up to the possibility of charter schools. They had some strong expertise in there. They had a lot of local input into the process. And so that was where it all kicked off from. Nowadays, when we develop things like our masters, we use the tools that Jenica spoke of. We use steering committees. In our teacher program, we use varied committees. We do evaluation from a range of stakeholders. So we're constantly trying to gather information from the range of community members who were involved in. Yeah, that's me.
Dan, did you want to wrap up with anything?
Well, no. Barbara, do you have anything more you want to add?
Well, I just want to say I appreciate, the overview and kind of the total look at, the importance of planning, looking at really what your community is ready for, and getting them to that place, and really building that sense of first identifying individuals that might want to be on committee, want to be part of the action, but not only identifying them, but also empowering them. And that's a really key part of it. How do we empower those individuals within our community, whether they be youth, elders, providers, to to feel that, that they're a part of making a difference in their community, and celebrating that, because it is hard work. And so those pieces of identification, empowering, and celebrating, I think, are really important to keep that momentum moving forward.
And one other thing that I guess I would say is that, a few years ago, ANA moved its training modules. We used to have project development and pre-application work done in one training. And a few years ago, ANA decided that's not the best way of doing this. And they set up a two-tiered training approach to doing prep work for applications. The first part of the training is project planning and development workshops that ANA funds and that we conduct around in all of the regions. In fact, there's one in Portland next week. So make sure, if you can, to get to those PPD workshops, planning and project development workshops. You'll pick up a lot of good information on how to move forward with effective project planning, and it'll include information on working in the community-based planning approaches, and engaging the community in project development. That's really the deal. I think the projects that have the best chance of getting funded are projects that have a really clear connection to the community and a well-defined work plan that's going to be that community involvement and community oversight is going to be part of. So that's what I've got to say. Thanks, Jenica.
Thank you, everyone. So at this time, we do not have any questions, but we will give just a few more minutes for people to enter any questions they may have into the Q&A box, while I remind everyone that the Western Region is hosting an early project planning and development training in Portland, Oregon, over May 1st through 3rd. So if you'd like to dig a bit deeper in the topics of today's presentation, I'd recommend that you register to attend this free event by visiting our website at anawestern.org. If you are unable to attend the Portland training next week, all 4 regions, regional training centers, host project planning and development trainings at locations across the United States. And these take place typically in late summer and early fall. So keep an eye out for those dates and locations in the near future. Also, in 2 weeks on May 10th at 3 p.m. Eastern, the Western Region will be hosting another webinar on food, diet, and mental health. So if you're interested in listening to that, you can also sign up on our website. And finally, if you have any questions about today's webinar or questions about project planning and development in general, feel free to reach out to your regional TTA center. The information is on the screen here, and I'll leave it up for just a few seconds to allow you to get that information. Otherwise, thank you everyone for joining our webinar. If you have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out to one of the regional centers, and that concludes our webinar for today.